Today, what I want to share with you is an application that I built that automates the entire process of writing meeting notes. Like many of you, I have a lot of meetings back to back, and sometimes I'm taking a lot of insightful notes on notepads and iPads, etc. And I don't necessarily document those that I can then share with either the prospect or client I'm speaking with or my peers inside the company. Now, there's a lot of issues with that. And by automate these entire process, and not just automating the summary of the notes, but also placing them in very strategic locations where they're easily retrievable, helps us actually take those notes, extract them, and use them in future calls with either clients, prospects, and or peers. Now, before I get started, hello, my name is Dylan Davis. I'm the founder of Gradient Labs, and at Gradient Labs, we actually help companies automate their internal processes utilizing AI, so they can then focus on the things that matter most for them. So if that's interesting to you, feel free to check out the link in the description so you can book a discovery call to see if there's a good match for us. With that being said, I want to walk you through this application. And to walk you through it, I'm going to show you the end result first. In the end result, there's two different scenarios we have currently. We have video conferencing and we have voice memos from iPhones. So video conferencing could be Zoom calls, and sooner that Zoom call ends, it automatically gets transcribed, summarized, and placed in a certain location. And if it is a voice memo, all you have to do is drop that memo in a certain location, which is the incoming folder here. That's monitored at all times. That's then automated, transcribed, etc., and then placed into a certain location. Now, you might ask, why are you using voice memos? Well, I have a lot of phone calls, and I also like to have a lot of in-person meetings. So that means that I want to record those and not necessarily let those conversations get dropped to the wayside just because they weren't done through a specific conversation via Zoom or Google Hangout or anything else. So in this case, we're going to do a voice memo for iPhones. So I'm going to drop in a test recording here. I drop it into my incoming folder. What's going to happen here is the incoming folder is always being monitored. And when the application sees this new file was dropped, it's going to go through that process that I mentioned: transcription, summary, and placement in certain locations. So if I go back to our folder here, we have our CRM folder with our 2025 meetings, and we have our January folder. So if I go in here, there's nothing here right now. But if we wait 1 second, we can see that this folder has the first name of the individual that attended the meeting that was being interviewed by me. We have the date associated to that and the time. So if we click into this, we have three things. We have the automated generative summary from the AI, we have the transcript, and the audio file. So if I go into our summary, you can see in here, there's a bunch of information. So first we have a personal notes section. So say there's some notes that I do take that I want to transcribe or place into here. I then can place that in my personal notes section. Below that, we have participants. So who attended? We have Alex, that was the main person being interviewed. Fun fact, that's actually AI that I interviewed as a test audio case for this video. And then we have a bunch of information that I've customized. And that's a really important thing here with this application, is that it's customizable. We can specifically ask the AI to pull out certain things that are interesting to me for that meeting. In this case, on a recurring basis, the things that I care most about in conversations that I have with my prospects are the summary of the call, the action items associated, the key takeaways from that, any open questions that were discussed in the call that would be useful for me to research. And then the last one is next action items, basically. So next meeting details for the next thing that we're going to do together. So all of that's then summarized here with AI. But the next really cool thing here is I have a CRM tracker. In our CRM tracker, we have different types of information, but this is really a single location for all the calls that I have that I can easily reference for people that I've spoken with. So you can see the last name isn't always picked up because in the transcription, what's happening is we're actually intuiting what the last name is based off of the conversation. Maybe the last name isn't mentioned, so we're just going to pull in the first name. So we have Alex. And then we have we contacted them? Yes, no. We have pre-meeting notes, we have the recording, and our meeting note. So our recording here is basically in the folder I shared with you already, and then our meeting note here is in the summary that I shared with you already. So that's the final process. That's how everything is automated from end to end, which is really, really cool. And then the next thing I want to walk you through is how I actually went about kind of building this in more detail on the flow. So for those that aren't necessarily interested in the building part of the conversation, you can kind of skip off and go somewhere else. For those that are interested, feel free to stick around. Okay, so I've already talked through the flow a bit, but I want to kind of give you a visual of what it looks like. So first things first, we have our sources, our inputs, right? So we have Zoom and voice memo. So the Zoom goes into a certain folder, voice memo goes into a certain folder. Those are always being monitored. Once something drops into that's new, it's picked up, processed. Once it's finished being processed, it's placed into another folder, which is already called, I think it's called processed. Once that's done, it's picked up and it's then transcribed. So we have a whisper model running on my machine, and I use one of these smaller whisper models so it can transcribe it in a fast way. The quality is still good, no matter the size of the model that you're using from Whisper. Once the transcription is complete, I'm then going to pass that off to Claude. And I've chosen Haiku because it's actually really, really good. It's both ridiculously cheap, and the summary is always consistently It's consistently good based off of the system prompt you give it. So Haiku then summarizes it, takes that summary, and then incorporates it into a Google Doc, which is then kind of baked into the application. After that process, we're going to do a few things. We're going to take the intuited first name, the last name if it's known, and the date. We're then going to bake that into the title for the Google Drive folder. We're going to bake it into the Google Doc title. Then we're going to bake it into the Google Sheet input. That's for our CRM. So it kind of does all that for us in an automated fashion. So that's kind of the flow and how this application works. Now, a common question I get from builders that are actually building applications like this is, how did you build this? What is your process? So I want to give some insight into that. So I used a series of tools, mainly Cursor, but I start with GPT-4o, I then use o1, I then use Cursor most of the time, and then I'll sometimes use Claude projects for those kind of pesky errors. Now, there's a certain process I use to build out these applications. At the very beginning, before I do anything with Cursor, I want to have a very strong starting point so Cursor has the most probability of succeeding. Now, I've walked through this process a few times in different videos, but I'll walk through it one more time here with you. So at first we have our prompt. So our prompt is going to be basically describing what does the end application look like and how does it function, in as much detail as possible based off of what we understand, what we would like to have. We send that off to GPT-4o. We ask GPT-4o to actually create a product requirements document. So this is basically going to be a document that explains how does this thing actually function. So when we send that off, it's going to give you a detailed explanation of how it thinks the application would be functioning and also how it would be built by an engineer, which is very important. Once that's done, I then pass this off to o1, and I then ask o1 to create a much more detailed version of this product requirements document and assume that you're giving it off to an engineer that is a beginning engineer. They know very little, if nothing, about building applications, and I want you to guide them the entire way. And when you do this, also place it in a markdown file that then has checkboxes below each phase, because each phase is a macro phase of building out this product. And then each of those phases have subsections that have checkboxes. And the reason I'm doing that is once we've actually, let me kind of finish this explanation. Once we've gone here, we're actually going to pass this off to GPT-4o because sometimes o1 struggles to create markdown files. So I'm going to send that off to 4o to then create a proper markdown file. And then we have that we can use with Cursor. Now, back to my point, is why are we using markdown files? Well, when using Cursor, I actually like it to build applications, and especially bigger ones, in an iterative fashion. So the way I've prompted Cursor and how I kind of work with it is it always has to refer back to this markdown file to ensure that we've completed each phase. And after you've completed a phase and you've checked off the boxes in the markdown file, you then test that functionality. And you ask yourself, is this functioning as expected? If not, we need to go back and reassess this phase before we move to the next one. And this is kind of like iterative development with AI. That's kind of the process that I use for the starting point. And the next thing I want to share with you are lessons learned. So any project that I work on for a client, I always take lessons away. And there's two primary lessons I've taken from this specific project. So the first one are pesky bugs. So there are different ways that I figure out kind of methods to get around errors that are on a recurring basis. And there are different things that I've done, but this is one that I found that's recently quite useful. And that's using Claude projects. So what I'll do is I'll create a specific Claude project that I've labeled engineer. And I have an extensive system prompt that I actually will share with you in the description if you're interested. You can go see that system prompt. And that system prompt basically structures this engineer to assume that it's going to get an error from another developer, and it's going to have to methodically think through how to solve this problem based off the context given in that prompt. That's how we started out. And then I go to Cursor, and Cursor already has all the context of going through the errors with me. And I ask it, okay, I want you to create a very detailed prompt of all the context, as much context as possible before you send it off to a smarter model. And I actually say that to Cursor, you're going to send it off to a smarter AI that's going to help you solve this problem. Once it gives you all the context and it prompts that smarter AI, the Claude project assesses it, gives me an answer. I then paste that back into Cursor and say, okay, based off the response I've gotten from this other smarter AI, do you think that this is a valid solution? Cursor then thinks about it, assesses it, looks at the code, and then actually decides to put it in or not. Oftentimes it puts it in, and most of the time it solves my errors. So that's one lesson learned. The other one here is actually thinking model first. So we builders often like to overcomplicate things. And when we overcomplicate things, we should probably just think to ourselves, can AI do this without me having to programmatically do anything fancy? And oftentimes, in my situation, the answer is yes. This specific situation I want to share with you is with the titles that I mentioned earlier. We had our Google Drive title, our Google Docs, and Google Sheets titles. So there was an issue there because oftentimes it was hard to programmatically pull out the names without using AI. So if I then outsource that to AI saying, okay, in your summary that you then do for this meeting, I want you to also extract out the primary participant that's being interviewed in the conversation. And I want you to pull out their first name, their last name, and their role if that's known. Oftentimes, the first name is always available, so it pulls that out, places it at the top of the document, pulls out the last name if it's said, and pulls out the role if it's said. Once it pulls all that out, I can then parse that out with my application, pull that out, and then put that into the folder title, the document title, and the Google Sheets inputs. So this is one of those situations where just let the model do it. Ask yourself every single time when you come into an error that's probably hard to programmatically do, and ask, can AI do this? If so, let's outsource it. So those are the lessons. This is the application. I hope you found this useful. And like I said, if you're interested in working with Gradient Labs, you can check the link in the description, and you can book a 15-minute discovery call where we can see if there's a good match for the two of us and the projects you're trying to automate internally at your companies.